All right, today we're going live with the marijuana media. We've got Dave Rheins. We're going to talk about a little bit about a panel that we had last year at Hemp Fest regarding everything that is cannabis media, to kind of talk about what's happened, what's happening, and hopefully what will happen. Dave's an expert with us, so he's going to give us the lowdown. We're going to try to bust this out as quick as we can. Lots to go through, but essentially you can find Dave Rheins on all social media, including Twitter at Dave Rheins. He's an activist. He's an artist, a writer, entrepreneur, founder and executive of the director of the Marijuana Business Association, a returned Peace Corps volunteer, and proud dad. Dave, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, Josh. This is a great time to revisit what's going on in marijuana media because so much has changed in a year. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. Anything I missed out on the intro you want to fill in the audience?
Well, yeah, sure. I'm currently working in the cannabis technology space, which has always been one of my loves, and in the cannabis retail space. So I think that retail, from my perspective, really maps right into cannabis culture and cannabis commerce. And that's really what has been driving the evolution of our culture and our industry in the last 10 years or so that I've been working in it.
Yeah, been in the game a long time, so I'm excited to kind of get your retake on a panel that we had last year. Yeah. So without further ado, man, let's jump into that. Last year we were talking about a lot about the regulations and how difficult it was to try to get advertising out and to just get awareness for businesses on social media. There's a lot of regulations. So kind of want to get your follow-up opinion about maybe how this pandemic is helping, hurting, hindering, or otherwise. So despite all of the regulations, what do you recommend that cannabis businesses do to promote their brands and products, especially in today's issue?
Well, a great question. And I think there's a lot of misconception in terms of what is and is not available to canna brands. Certainly some of the mainstream channels, if you approach them directly, are still going to be hesitant. But there are lots of folks in cannabis media who are providing workarounds. Friends like Carrie Accardi at 420 Media, who has a new cannabis channel. She's been able to circumnavigate the legality, and really cannabis media regulation is pretty porous. It's sold at the local level, at the spot level, at the regional level, at the national level, at the global level, at the digital level. And so there's always an avenue to getting your message in front of the right consumer. It's just a little bit more circuitous in legal cannabis than it is anywhere else. Very much the same way that finances remain onerous for those who have cannabis companies, right? The banks charge you a surcharge. The VIG, we used to call it in the old days, right? So you pay a higher rate to maintain a bank account, a higher percentage on your checks, a higher surcharge on every fee, and payments remain challenging. That is the same thing in cannabis media, but quite honestly, I'm seeing every year, every month, and certainly both the pandemic and the election have further mainstreamed cannabis.
Absolutely. There's a lot going on. You mentioned Carrie Accardi. She's got some good channels going out and been able to not only utilize TV like Roku and some other platforms, but also mainstream TV. So that's kind of an exciting evolution, I guess, that we've kind of seen recently over the last year since we last met. I guess, how are you able to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of the industry in order to adapt, pivot, stay relevant, or maybe some other examples that you've seen?
Well, so, that's a great question. And I think that what you've seen is both an explosion in the number of cannabis companies, the number of cannabis voices, the number of messages, the number of events, the number of players, and a consolidation. as we go from grassroots and hyper local to national and global brands, you're seeing the big guys gobble up the bigger players regionally, and a lot of the little guys then end up being constituent players. From a cannabis production and retail perspective, the media follows exactly the same way. In the last year, we've seen the death of Dope magazine. We've seen the rise and fall and fall and fall, and a little bit of rise from High Times magazine, which in its creativity puts Tommy Chong once again on the cover. It's just ridiculous. It's a brand that doesn't understand the culture. You've seen innovators like Wes Abney and his confreres expanding, finding a new business model, finding new business markets, finding new business partners with guys like Danny Denko. And so that's, sort of taking the best out of, the old High Times embers and then igniting them through creativity and innovation. I think guys like Steve Bloom, another old High Times editor, has been innovative and has followed the trends as he established things like Celeb Stoner and the notion of the Tommy Chongs and the celebrity stoners were so much of the mainstream message when you talked about media. It was music and marijuana. But I think that's going away. I think what you're seeing now that's really, really interesting is that cannabis culture is no longer a thing. You have everyone from Santana to Martha Stewart selling, establishing canna brands. I mean, Martha Stewart, there is nothing unhip like Martha Stewart. And so, there's the underground has gone mainstream. Again, these are cycles that we've seen in pop music, went from underground to counterculture to alternative culture to no culture at all.
Do you think that is going to be, do you think CBD will be a gateway drug or the gateway to cannabis? You're seeing Keanu Reeves products. I had a friend of mine, actually it's my massage therapist, get Keanu Reeves CBD product and said it really helped her. I don't know if it's any good, but I'm curious, do you think that that's going to be the gateway?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I did an event in Indiana a couple of years ago, and Indiana, which is my hometown, Indianapolis, my hometown, and very, very super conservative, where the Pence brothers grew up, all that kind of stuff. And I was at the political club addressing, the medical marijuana veterans. And I was asked by the local press, CBD, is that just a gateway to cannabis? And I said, yes, absolutely. Legal cannabis is coming to a hometown near you. It's already in your schools. It's already being used by all of your demographics in all of its various forms. And now places like Indiana, surrounded by legality of Michigan and Illinois and medical in Ohio and robust hemp in Kentucky, there is no escaping, cannabis. And so what you're talking about now, interestingly enough, is sort of where does hemp end? Where does cannabis start? And the answer is the distinction is purely theoretical. It's one plant in its many forms, just like corn is one plant that has many forms that can be used for oil or sugars or whiskeys or feed or food, depending on how you cultivate it. And it's regulated and sold in different markets in different ways. And cannabis is the same thing. And so in many ways, I think this notion of cannabis media or marijuana media is like saying, automotive media or fashion media. There are and will be hardcore enthusiast books, connoisseur books, channels for folks who really want to learn about the plant. But mostly we evaporate and become invisible and get subsumed and absorbed into mainstream culture and mainstream media. as we become just another brand, just another aspect of modern life, like technology. I mean, when I'm old enough, I remember there were magazines about cell phone use, your ISP, managing your digital footprint. Imagine today, going and buying a magazine on how to participate on Facebook. It's absurd, right? And so in many ways, that's what's happened is we've preached to the choir and they've learned the song and we're all singing in chorus.
So do you think that it's already been normalized to the point where we don't have to have the same conversation that we did last year about the hyperbole regarding higher than normal wages in the cannabis industry and all of that, where now it's more about just the normalcy of it? We're talking about regular business instead of just, oh, you can go ahead and make millions. Is that the right
exactly
step?
right. I think it is the right step. And I think that what we've seen in 6-7 years of legal cannabis, the years go by so fast, is that it is not a green rush. I mean, there was a green rush because it was a new market. It was a blank slate. It was an industry and its brands and constituent businesses that were all created wholesale, along with the regulations, along with the societal adoption of this newly legal activity. So it was exciting, and there was and remains tremendous opportunity. I mean, legal cannabis is the fastest growing segment in the economy for sure. Cannabis technology is the fastest growing within that. And it's starting to catch up. What you're starting to see in cannabis is the mainstreaming. So whereas in the past, last year, even 2 years ago, you still had robust magazines that were defining cannabis media. They've all gone away because magazines have all gone away in real world America and real world, except for the very specialty hobby books. What you've seen is that events have evaporated. Right, the MJBA cons and the Seattle Hemp Fests have all gone virtual, and in a way that's a good thing because they became too big. They became ridiculous. I mean, if I'm a retailer, why am I still operating as if I'm running a bodega in New York City in the 1980s? Why aren't I using e-commerce? Why aren't I using digital media? Why aren't I using affinity and loyalty? Why aren't I understanding and maintaining an ongoing continuity and relationship with my customers? And the answer is the smart ones are, right? And the folks who are coming in from Canada and from big money and big pharma and big tobacco and big alcohol and big CPG, and all of them are playing in the industry. They bring with them the real world discipline of how to run a business, how to manage and market and operate an enterprise at a multi-state level, even with difficulty in regulations and legality. Big pharma faces that, so does alcohol. Alcohol is still regionally controlled in many places. And so the answer is, hey, they know how to build the brands. They know how to run a company. What they don't understand is the unique vagaries, cultural, hyper local differences between a Spokane and a Seattle, between a Bellingham and a Vancouver, between a Portland, Oregon and a Portland, Maine. These are completely different marketplaces, even though they all have legal cannabis. They're not selling the same things. They're not selling the same brands. They're not even selling them in the same ways or thinking about them in the same ways. Right. So that's where the opportunity remains. And that's where the local media is still relevant. And that's where local entrepreneurs can still make a difference. But at a certain point, especially with this election coming up, you saw Kamala Harris say on the debates for the first time ever, we're calling for full legalization of marijuana and the expungement of the records of those who have been incarcerated because of that.
Decriminalized, right? I don't think she said legalize.
She said legalize,
Did
fully
she really?
legalize. She said, we will fully legalize marijuana and expunge the records of those who suffered under our drug wars. Powerful stuff on a national stage, oftentimes lost. And again, there's where the mainstream media missed the story. And, you know, you have to hear that on MJ News. You have to hear that through Celeb Stoner. You have to hear that through Danny Denko and those guys. But, you know, the opportunity is big, but we got to stop talking about bongs and we got to really stop talking about the plant as if we were all horticulturalists. I mean, I went to the bookstore last night, actual physical bookstore, believe it or not, and looked at the various sections. And while gardening remains robust, lots of people like flower cutting and arrangements and managing their herb gardens and things like that. It is not the entire bookstore.
I agree. Leading up to the election, we're seeing some interesting stuff. So kind of wanted to touch base on some issues that we were having with Facebook last year, blocking cannabis related businesses, shutting those down. We're seeing a ton of stuff, you know, with Q and conspiracies and Twitter, you name it, Facebook shutting down a lot of accounts. We're not hearing so much about that happening to cannabis businesses, but I'm sure it's still happening. So two-part question for you. How are companies able to overcome this? And what advice do you have for companies in emerging markets on how to survive a volatile industry?
Redundancy in bank accounts, in social media, in web, in data. Back your stuff up, have the ability to switch to alternative accounts. Most cannabis brands have multiple social media accounts and multiple bank accounts, you know, multiple ways to process transactions, that kind of thing. I think we've just learned the workaround, which is a natural extension of you know, the derivation of the marketplace. There are no people more innovative than cannabis marketers. But yeah, you cannot rely on Twitter or Facebook as your sole communications channel because, yeah, you can get shut down. Same way that you can't rely on one bank, same way that you can't rely on the payment folks to always come through. They don't always come through.
That's a good point. All right. So what about trying to personalize content? If you have multiple channels, multiple platforms, how do you get to individuals? Can you give some examples either from yourself or things that you've seen in the media on a good example of how somebody is personalizing that content across platforms to really attract the right person?
Sure. Yeah. One of my very favorites is a guy named Kurt Robbins. I came across him years ago when he was doing, he was writing, another High Times alumnus. He was writing under the pen name of Gooey Rabinski. So I don't know if you know Gooey Rabinski. No. Clearly not his real name. But Gooey, I think, published hundreds, if not more, serious articles. And with legalization the last couple of years, Gooey came out of the closet and said, you know, my real name is Kurt Robbins, and I'm a technical writer and professional writer based in Los Angeles, and was instantly embraced as Kurt Robbins. We built that name. And then he started building constituent brands because he does a lot of work. He does consulting. He does formal education and training. So he created Higher Learning Las Vegas LV as a brand and has a whole different parameter of what he talks about, conversations and different followers, different types of content. He has another one, Cannabis and Culture. He has another one that he does just terpenes, terpene information. So I think it's segmentation, and it reminds me of my background in mainstream media. So when I was at places like Time Warner, we would segment magazines, and we would say, here is In Style magazine, and here is People magazine, and here is Fortune magazine, and each of those magazines had its own little slice on pretty much the same kind of news. And I think that that's what you see on any big media company. And so you as a person, and Josh, you do it yourself, right? So you say, hey, under this hat, I'm doing media today. And on another hat, you may see me doing consulting. As I said, I really love retail. Work with a lot of smart retailers to figure out, okay, hey, we got licensed and became compliant and opened our doors, and that was victory one. And then we expanded and added a store and added a couple of lanes and added e-commerce and did some of the things I talked about. And that was victory two. And now where are we going? Right now that I see, oh, wow, Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, all legal, Arizona may go. You're seeing the whole country evolve. And as a retailer, then you need to think more mainstream. Oh, wow, like any regional, like the drugstore guys, right? Used to be you'd have your mom and pop drugstore guys in your neighborhood. Now they're all CVS or Walgreens. Why?
Yeah, Bartell's just got sold for $90 million to Rite Aid. Unfortunately, a local.
That's right.
They've been in business for 130 years, and they only sold for $90 million. But that's a podcast for another day.
Isn't that crazy? And they had to, right? And that was one of those when that you say, oh no, Bartell's won't. They're our local brand, and the answer is no, they're not. And the same thing with the grocery stores, and the same thing with every category, quite honestly. And so that's what I mean about pattern recognition, and it's a function of our success. So whereas when we were small and somewhat alien to the mainstream, we could maintain these separate pockets of culture and commerce, and no one bothered us because they didn't want us in their world. When Martha Stewart is hawking CBD, and when you go to Whole Foods and there's a whole aisle of hemp products,
right?
You don't have to go to Hemp Fest.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I want to follow up on how to personalize content with brand authentication. So The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, just surpassed 200 million followers on Instagram, making him the most followed male, I think, in the US, if not the world. So with that, how do you keep your brand authentic while not selling out to your sponsors' interests? And maybe do you have like an example that you've seen that you like?
Well, not to sound like Bill Clinton, but it all depends on how you define authentic. I'm smiling because you used The Rock as an example of authenticity. So we really have jumped the shark.
Let me clarify. I'm not saying that. He's saying that. He said because he's authentic, he got 200 million followers. I'm not a follower. And that's not my words, but go ahead.
Well, so, again, I think one could confuse and conflate authenticity with popularity. And I think you're going to run askew because of that. I don't think authentic translates into influencer. I think influencer is a bullshit marketing thing that people pay into. I think payola is alive and well and living on social media. I think that, I do it organically, and I know how hard it is to generate and maintain an audience. We have 350,000 people on our audience, on our networks, but we've been doing it for a long time, and we crank out a lot of content. So to jump to 30 million. It's all pay to play is the answer, and it's like anything else. So is that authentic? I don't know. I think that you can get a lot of folks to click once or twice on anything. Really, I would suggest that authenticity is about saying and doing things in alignment, good words, good thoughts, good deeds kind of thing. So I don't think it has anything to do with influencing.
On that, what is a mission-driven business then? And how do you create a loyal audience with content that can still create business opportunities?
Great question. Yeah. So cannabis started out as a mission-driven industry. Folks who were involved in cannabis didn't do it primarily for commercial consideration. They did it because they were in the lifestyle, because they liked to smoke weed and needed to deal, a quarter pound in order to get their ounce for the month kind of thing. And then it evolved into, hey, let's have products that fit into that lifestyle. So that was passion marketing. Cause marketing is an interesting and somewhat dangerous thing, in that causes are even more likely to lose favor than celebrities, and that's saying something. So yesterday's cause is today's outrage, and so I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you form a business around an ephemeral cause. With that being said, many folks have a cause, or have an orientation, have a mission. Dr. Bronner, Dr. Bronner's is a fantastic mainstream company that for years and years and years has been creating biodegradable hemp-based products, soaps that you could configure yourself, and were just great, and has always stayed true to that. And people buy into that, and has now expanded in as he was a little hesitant, I have to say, about legal cannabis back in the early days. Didn't want to tie in with our marijuana events because didn't want to lose that mainstream acceptance he had worked so hard to glean, but now is very much an advocate for progressive causes. I think folks like Progressive Insurance, right? It's called Progressive Insurance because it was started by a progressive, and he funded lots of progressive and other wacky initiatives, right? And so you can have that. Ultimately, though, I'm a purist. I like to keep my my politics pure, and I like to keep my commerce focused on good business. And then I like to align and do those businesses that I think are beneficial. Unfortunately, so much of our economy is not oriented towards doing good. Our science is not oriented to solving the world's problems, but oriented towards creating intellectual property that makes profit. It's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. And if Dr. Bronner's listening, we're still interested with the Kincaid in making that for you pre-pandemic. That was a thing. And then, of course, a lot of projects have been kicked to the side, either delayed or derailed entirely, which brings me to the next question about rapidly evolving technologies, or just maybe the lack of options with events, whatever it is. How can companies adapt to meet the current changes we're in, and what recent innovations can you share?
Great question. And again, this is a perfect example of how fungible the IQ of the cannabis industry and its entrepreneurs is. We've been super innovative. Some of the early conferences were not so good. But all of them were trying new technologies. I mean, I've seen, avatars and walking through virtual 3D conferences, which I found kind of weird, particularly when you could walk through buildings. And sort of the literally ghosting and being ghosted by perspective. So as you approach, a contact, a would-be contact, they can actually disappear in front of you, which normally at a trade show they have to duck into Starbucks. So we really are innovating the sales networking process. But there have been some really good ones. And I think, the Zoom calls have been really fun. I've sat in on some wonderful Zoom calls. Curved Papers does a little teaching people how to roll their own using curved papers on Sundays at 4:20. It's a fun thing, and people like Steve Bloom or all kinds of folks, Lelania, all kinds of folks have tuned in. Carrie Accardi showed up. It's one of those events where you're just gathering together where you wouldn't normally gather together. And then Hemp Fest is doing a virtual thing this last couple of days. I was not able to tune in. CanX, I know the Israeli folks, Dr. Meshulam, who was the professor who discovered THC in the 1960s, is keynoting a conference live from Tel Aviv on October the 26th. That's going to be a really cool thing. And so in many ways, that's an event that I wouldn't have really even gone to or considered, because I don't have the time to go to Tel Aviv, in the middle of October. But now I'm going to be able to participate virtually, and they're developing new tools. So I think it's really fun. I miss having the networks. I used to throw big parties. You've been to a couple of them, I think. And I like doing that. I can't wait till I can have fire spinners and pyrotechnics again.
All right. Well, before we wrap this up, I got a couple more questions I kind of want to dive into, namely about, money. Last year, we were seeing a lot of US-based companies poised to deploy a lot of cash. We also saw a lot of Canadian companies coming in, increasing their cross-border acquisitions and deals. What are you seeing this year as certain things are fast-tracked, like delivery, and other things that are delayed, like social consumption lounges? Where's the money going? What's trending? What's your opinion?
Cannabis technology is the hottest sector in the hottest section of the economy. Cannabis technology. I mentioned retail multiple times. That's where it's all coming down, because retail is where the grower meets the retailer meets the consumer, right? Where B2B meets B2C. It's where technology meets the product and the brands. So from the POS systems to the security systems to the affinity, loyalty, CRM, the displays, which are turning into media plays. Retail is a great example of where that technology innovation is happening. So you've seen, first of all, in the last year, all of the POS systems, or quite a few of them, have been acquired. Quite honestly, you're seeing acquisition is probably the big story around the food chain, and so that consolidation comes in the hot spots. Whereas a year or two ago it was the production. Hey, let's own the means of production. Let's figure out how to grow it. Then it went into processing and branding, and I think now hemp extraction, drying, productization is really hot. I think a lot of folks are are realizing that CBD was one of those trends that went up and is going to come down, and right size. Not that it goes away, but it becomes just another tool in the cannabinoidal tool chest. So I think you're going to see lots of hemp products. I love the cannabis technology space. Delivery, what you saw with the pandemic was a lot of curbside pickup, delivery, and online ordering. So you're going to see lots of innovation in that space, lots of consolidation in that space. You're going to see folks who used to do just the menu, folks who used to do just the delivery, realize that's not enough. It's like the browser wars, right? Or the instant messaging. It's not enough just to have one app. You have to have a suite of products, a suite of tools and solutions. And then really once everybody's got their arsenal, it's game on. Then it's back to traditional business, which is strategy wins, planning wins, forethought wins. It's why you see a lot of folks, going back to our media discussion, like High Times and Dope, and those guys go out of business because they didn't have the right strategy from day one. And while it looked good while you were climbing the mountain, and while things were moving up, the inevitable fall is the result of not having the right plan, not having the right strategy. That's what's manifesting in legal cannabis. That's what will continue to drive. The smart money is after the smart management.
Where do you see growth for 2021? What does your crystal ball prediction say? What are we going to be doing? Is it going to be virtual reality with an Oculus headset? What's media going to look like? What's the industry going to look like? What's your crystal ball say?
Oh, I think you're going to see more corporate sponsorship, patronage in a more holistic manner. The old-fashioned sponsors of, I'm going to hang a banner, I'm going to give away some, poker chips or, that kind of silly trade show stuff, and was called sponsorship. It's trade promotion. And I think that what you'll see now is entities like Seattle Hemp Fest will either innovate or they will go away. They will realize that, hey, there are a lot of players who grew up loving and supporting and embracing Seattle Hemp Fest. And we got to get our brother Vivian and the crew to embrace the 21st century digital media, which means they've got to partner up with mainstream media. They've got to create a media brand. And that means they've got to create programming as opposed to booths and banners and buttons. And so that's the future. High Times, Dope, Northwest Leaf, all of your buddies that we've been talking about, they have to innovate. It doesn't make sense to have a paper magazine in 2021, period. It doesn't make sense. Well, High Times, Grand High Times, Cannabis Cups, which were illegal events taking advantage of the medical marijuana law. So those were not sustainable. That was not a good strategy. You can't invest in something that's not legitimate. But is there a need for folks in the cannabis culture to get together? Yes. Will somebody figure that out? Yes. Will we get together as people unmasked or masked and figure out appropriate social interaction? Yes, we will. It may take a little while. I'm not sure if that's 2021. I think 2021 is, let's figure out the new alliances. Let's figure out that, hey, we got to play with each other nicely, and that we can no longer be segmented by state, by segment, or by purity of philosophy. And I think that that's what's happening, and it's exciting, but there'll be a lot of pain for the next coming months for those who are professionally in legal cannabis.
We crammed a lot in a short period of time. Is there anything that you want to cover before we wrap this up?
Vote. I guess the last thing that I would say is I want to give a shout out to my brother Michael Stusser and Higher Ground TV. who partnered with the good folks at Saints Joints, legal cannabis company based here in Washington State, to create the ballot box pre-roll package. I don't know if you saw that. It was a gorgeous package. Came in a couple of varieties, blue and red, corresponding to your political orientation. It had a Bill of Rights inside next to 5 really nice packed half-gram pre-rolls. Good weed, good message, good marketing for a small brand to differentiate. And because of that small brand, Saints Joints got national attention on High Times, on Forbes, on every major outlet covering the cannabis scene, and spread a good notion that hey, the one thing, if you want to do cause marketing, start with yourself. Get active in your local community, not just in the cannabis aspects of your local community, in your local community, vote, join the school board, join the PTA, join, your local parks division, clean up the streets, get active, get local. It all starts locally, and vote.
All right, Dave, you're awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. I want to thank my guest, Dave Rheins. He is the co-founder of MJBA, the Marijuana Business Association. And where else are you at? You're all over the place. You've got 350,000 followers on a bunch of platforms.
Yeah, so we do. I publish MJ News Network. So go to mjnewsnetwork.com. Marijuana Channel 1 on YouTube, which we've got hundreds of videos of great people doing great things locally for legalization. I'm working with the fine folks over at Dauntless Software. And, I'm just happy to be part and do whatever I can whenever I can. So I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, Josh. You're doing good stuff.
Absolutely. We'll have some of those links in the show notes too once this gets posted. All right. I want to thank my guest, Dave Rheins. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Or don't.
Peace.
And I'm out.